and good afternoon, everybody, or good morning or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. My name is Chris Van Dome. I'm a research fellow here on the Africa programme at Chatham House, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you all this afternoon to our event on South Africa's economic reform and employment in the context of the coronavirus pandemic, where we will be welcoming President of COSATU, Zingiswa Losi, to speak to us. As many of us who are following South Africa know, unemployment in South Africa fell by an estimated 18% between February and April this year. The measures imposed to control the spread of COVID-19 have suffocated an already weak economy, and unemployment has hit a new high. The aims of the government's economic reform plans include the support of job creation in labour-intensive industries, but this asks questions around rebalancing of the economy and the effect that will have on the fiscus and job losses or potential job losses in state agencies and enterprises. Protecting jobs while ensuring the health and safety of workers are dual priorities for all in South Africa, and they require the joint commitment and social compact of labour, business and government. So absolutely delighted to welcome Zingiswa Losi to speak to us this afternoon about these issues. Before I introduce her, I'd just like to run through a few housekeeping points. The first is that Zingiswa will speak for up to 20 minutes, and after her presentation, we will open the floor to Q&A. You'll be able to participate in the Q&A by using the raised hand function on your Zoom, so you can raise a hand. If you don't feel comfortable raising your hand and asking your question in person, you can use the Q&A box throughout the meeting, and I'll be taking some questions from there as well. I'd like to welcome everybody who's joining us on Facebook Live, as well as anybody who's watching this video on YouTube after the event. I'd like to remind everybody that this meeting is on the record. It's not under the famous Chatham House rule, which has become increasingly difficult to enforce in these times. So this meeting is on the record, and you can tweet us and follow us on #CHAfrica. Our handle is @AfricaProg, and you can follow COSATU at @_COSATU. So, Zingiswa Losi is President of the Congress of South Africa Trade Unions, having been elected in 2018 in the 13th National Congress. Zingiswa is a trained soldier and formerly served in the South African Defence Force for 3 years. She has previously worked as an operator and quality inspector at the car manufacturer port in Port Elizabeth, and as a shop steward with the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, NUMSA. During this time, she served in various NUMSA committees, including finance and education in the Eastern Cape region. She's been politically active since her early youth, and she joined the Congress of South African Students while at school and served in the ANC Youth League in the Eastern Cape. So without any further ado, Zingiswa, you are very welcome. Please, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris, and good afternoon to all the esteemed colleagues, comrades, and friends. As a federation, we want to say to you, Chair, that thank you for inviting me on behalf of Congress of South African Trade Unions to raise the views of millions of South African workers and unions on economic reform and employment in the context of coronavirus pandemic. Now, we want to say as a federation that these are challenges that workers and their unions have been grappling with. And in fact, the challenges that we are battling with have been with us long before any of us has ever heard of COVID-19. Now, they will remain with us as we emerge from lockdown and as we are trying to adjust to the new normal. In South Africa, they are in essence called these challenges triple challenges. Now, I want to raise a point and say that 40% and rising levels of unemployment, and to our great shame, it is not just a South African issue, but it is a worldwide matter, which in the world we have recorded the levels of poverty and inequality which have kept on rising. And we want to say that former President Thabo Mbeki once said that we are two nations in one. And we think that this pandemic has shown us the two worlds in one, in a country. Now, our challenges have become worse with the explosion of corruption and what we call state capture by a rapacious and corrupt elite in the past decade, and as a consequence, the collapse of many of our state-owned entities. COVID-19 has just made our crisis much worse. Now, whilst our problems are massive, like the rest of the world these days, we do have it within ourselves as South Africans to fix these challenges. Because we have no alternative, we have no choice. Now, this is exactly what drives us as a Federation COSATU. Now, for some of the colleagues who may not be familiar with COSATU, we are a largest trade union federation in South Africa, and we were founded during the darkest days of our struggle against apartheid. We have almost 20 affiliated unions covering every single sector of the economy with nearly 2 million members. Now, these range from nurses to doctors, from mining to manufacturing, from police to prisons, from farms to transport, including domestic workers. Now, many unions are now applying to join COSATU, and these include from forestry workers to taxi drivers and musicians, meaning artists in our country. We are part of the ruling tripartite alliance with the African National Congress and South African Communist Party, but we are an independent federation. We are a worker-mandated union movement. Now, when government, which a ruling party that is in government we are in alliance with, when they blunder, we hold them to account. We don't shy away from doing that. When previous presidents deviated from their mandates, we call them to order. Now, our job as a federation is to protect workers, their families, their jobs and wages, and we do not shy away from that, and we are unapologetic. Now, on the economic context, it is important to base our response and interventions on our economic realities. Even before the lockdown, we were in a recession in South Africa. We are now in deep economic recession and are in a serious danger of heading into an economic depression. Unemployment levels are at 40%, and we are likely to push past 50%. And estimates of possible job losses range from 1 to even 7 million. Now, key economic sectors from tourism to hospitality, manufacturing and mining, to even the SOEs, which are state-owned entities, are bleeding, and thousands of workers' jobs are at risk. The overwhelming majority of the unemployed are African, women, youth, and the rural people. Now, they do not have the education and skills requirement for the economy and to ensure that they can find decent work. 26 years since 1994, we have made very little progress in addressing our apartheid legacies, in addressing the structural challenges to growing our economy. And we want to say that, yes, we have made some movement, and it is critical to remember but massive strides in eradicating many of the social ills we have inherited from the apartheid era. We are not taking that away, but we want to raise a point that housing, water, social security, education, health, and sector are still challenges that our government is battling with. We still need to do more. Now, we have entrenched a vibrant constitutional democracy, but we cannot afford to take comfort from those important achievements when millions are going to bed hungry, when millions fear losing their jobs and their ability to take care of their families. COVID-19, as we have said, has exposed many of these inherent weaknesses of our state and our economy. Now, before COVID-19, many key economic SOEs were already in intensive care, as we put it in our country. They are now in danger of collapse. As an example is our state airline, which has collapsed, a broadcaster that is retrenching workers, ESCOM that is battling to maintain its generational capacity and provide reliable and affordable electricity. And we are witnessing the collapse of state-owned entities. As we are preparing now, as we are getting in here, I had to move places because we are in a load shedding for more than 4 hours with no electricity. Now, COVID-19, as I've said, has amplified the many economic pressures and the many economic pressure points we are grappling with. And our limited state resources have been placed under even more pressure. Now, whilst we are battling with all these challenges, we can no longer wait for foreign direct investment to save us. And we are saying as a federation that all countries are struggling to deal with their economic and social crisis. And therefore, South Africa has a responsibility to rebuild itself and its own economy. And we're saying, as the world emerges from the lockdown, and hopefully without second waves of infection and lockdowns, there will have an increased need to ramp up our economic training interventions if we hope to become competitive and to attract the legal domestic and foreign investment that our economy so badly needs to save jobs and to avoid an economic depression. We want to raise issues on the economic recovery. We want to say that we have two options on how to rebuild our devastating economy and tackle unemployment. Now, we can continue to tread water, put plasters here and there, and hope or pray for a miracle. This will see unemployment being pushed past 50% and take us to an economic depression. In short, that will be tantamount to economic suicide. So it will see workers paying the price for the failures of political and business leadership. And this is something that the Federation COSATU will not stand idle by and watch. So what we can do, we can show leadership, be decisive, and undertake the bold and immediate interventions needed to grow the economy. And these must include the following key economic interventions: macro interventions. We're raising a point and we're saying as a federation that we have been saying we need a bold 1 trillion stimulus plan to be tabled in Parliament in October 2020 when we are getting the medium-term budget policy statement. We have to stimulate growth and not simply delude ourselves into believing that premature expenditure cuts will start a fragile economy. We need to unblock the 200 billion loan guarantee scheme, of which 4 months after its launch, only 7% has been dispensed. Further repo rate cuts by the South African Reserve Bank and commercial banks. Payments deferrals by the commercial banks and debt reduction for consumers and businesses who lost earnings or are in danger of losing jobs and closing down. We need to fast track the infrastructure program, and in particular prioritizing investments in ports, in freight, in passenger rail, in energy and water. So in essence, sectors that will unlock the economy are skills and job intensive. We're also saying that modernizing the ports will immediately boost manufacturing and agricultural exports and create thousands of jobs in those sectors. We also are raising that we need to provide massive dedicated financial support for sectors of the economy that are badly bleeding. You have your tourism sector, your hospitality, your entertainment, hotels and restaurants. And many of these sectors are large employers. They will take time to recover. So in the meantime, we must assist them. And we're saying the support from government and the banks to them has been a minimal, and this has to be fixed. We need a comprehensive buy local program that is binding public and private sector procurement. This must also include tax incentives and private sector reward points system that will revamp up public, private, and consumer local procurement. And we are saying we need clear political leadership in the fight against corruption. With this must include the immediate dismissal of any political office bearer or manager that is implicated in corruption, the attachment of their assets and their speedy prosecution and incarceration. Now, that is why we were calling for government to establish rapid responses that are anti-corruption, like your anti-corruption courts on the model of what we had in South Africa during the 2010 World Cup courts. To move forward, we are saying that as a federation, we drafted a response to a ESCOM social compact. And we gave responses on how we can manage challenges that we are faced with regards to SOEs. And we have been saying to our government that it is time for us to look into that proposal that we've made and begin to implement those issues. Now, dealing with the many structural impediments to economic growth, like your poor internet connectivity and high data charges, those are some of the things that we need to address, because the fourth industrial revolution is here. We must ensure that there is a just transition that includes workers, the youth, women, persons with disability, and rural areas. Now, we have witnessed the rapid growth of our call center industry. Now, we are saying we must embrace but use technology to boost the economy. We also say that a massive public employment that guarantees all unemployed persons a minimum amount of work and paid at least at the level of the national minimum wage, as we have fought and we think we have won. Now let me gallop and move to social relief. We're saying an extension of the relief provided by unemployment insurance fund for workers, businesses, and sectors that remain under distress regulation restrictions and beyond as we build the economy. We have said they must be extended. And we're happy with the developments that have taken place of the Auditor General's report that led to the suspension of the leaders of the UIF commission in our country. And we're saying we have warned about possibility of corruption as we are dealing with COVID-19. Now, we have called for the fast tracking and the realization of a basic income grant, but also we are saying that we need the honoring of the 2020 public service and local government wage agreements, because, for an example, this morning we were dealing with a public sector protest actions of workers where our government has signed a 3-year agreement, and on the last year where the agreement must be implemented for the 3rd year, our government has called to the courts to nullify that agreement and deem it to be invalid. So public sector workers who are deemed as frontline workers who are fighting against COVID-19 to help our healthcare system are being managed by our own government. So as I conclude, we are saying as a federation that the challenges facing us as South Africans are great. COVID-19 and our pandemic of corruption has made them seem insurmountable. Yet we have no choice but to roll up our sleeves and tackle these issues. Because if we continue as it is, we will all fail. But we must engage in honest and meaningful introspection, Failure to do so will continue to condemn our youth to unemployment. And as we have seen during the lockdown, workers and the public depended upon a capacitated developmental state. Now, when the state is unable to make intervention, when the state is broken, then the people of this country continue to lose hope on how the future is going to look like. Now, the interventions are known and must be based upon not only on the needs of the economy of today, but I think we must be looking forward to what the future of the economy is going to be looking like and prepare ourselves for that future. Now, we are saying, Chair, that it is up to us as government, business, and labor. And we must be willing to do what must be done. And as a federation, COSATU, we are ready and we will ensure that these issues are addressed. Even whilst we have to drag government and business kicking and screaming at times, but we are confident that we will find each other as social partners. Now, government, business, and labor are in agreement on most of the economic interventions in our country, and we will be concluding our economic recovery plans negotiation at the level of NEPLEC, our social dialogue forum in the next few days. Now, these will then be presented to the President to announce to the public on behalf of all of us as social partners. Now, COSATU is deeply invested in a social compact. It is the only way that we can rebuild our economy, save and create jobs, and make South Africa a driver for the rebirth of our continent. We want to thank for this opportunity that has been given to us, and I hope that I was managed to be within the allocated time. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. You've covered a broad range of issues of key interest to our audience here today and have managed to do so within the allotted time. So thank you very much. Well done. I'll start taking questions. As I said, you can use the raise hand function on your Zoom platform in order to raise a question in person, and we'll invite you to unmute your audio and turn your video on to do that. And I will also take some questions from the Q&A box as well that are starting to come through. So to start off with, I have two raised hands here. So first of all, I will go to Tampi. Tampi, are you there?
Yeah, I am here.
Excellent. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Singi, thank you very much. I am from India and trade union activist. You are telling about the corruption. The corruption, is it a new came with the pandemic or already it is there? Because globally, corruption is everywhere. So do you think that it can be stopped at time as similar immediately? Number one. Second one, we feel the pandemic is a man-made misery of some countries. Why can't we make them to answer instead of we becoming poor? Thank you very much.
Tampi, thank you very much. Next question will go to Victor Oshodi. Victor, are you there? Hello, Victor, are you there? Are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, I am. I have unmuted myself.
Oh, please go ahead. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, Zinge. My question is, at this period when we're trying to overcome this coronavirus, I'd like to know, does your trade union, as the president of South African Trade Union, would you encourage youth participation in terms of sharing ideas and technology as a means of elaborating or bringing out the youth away from this from unemployment stage? And because I'm a Nigerian and I'm listening to this program from Nigeria, I also want to ask you, would you use your office to encourage bilateral trade among the nation? Because my company, for example, we work with foreign companies, especially African countries and over the world, but we understand that there are a lot of bottlenecks. So I want to know, are you going to use your office this time to advocate for collaborations among the different countries in Africa? That's my.
Okay, Victor, thank you very much. And we'll take a third question, the last question for this round, and then I'll come back to the others who have raised their hands for the next round. So the last question for this round, please, from Tulisile Piri.
Sorry, I was on mute. Hi, and thank you for allowing me or affording me the opportunity to put my question through to Ms. Zingi. I actually run a reputation and stakeholder relationships management company out of South Africa for the whole of Africa. My question is, what role can trade unions play in advocating for SMMEs in Africa, and most importantly also in South Africa? What has actually been the trend of late is that hard-working SMMEs are actually struggling to get access to finance because big financial companies basically do not have empathy to the problems that are unique to them. And also at the same time, you actually find that government, in its governments across Africa, put policies in place that are supposed to support these SMMEs. But we know that in practice, they continue to basically feel the brunt of being small and competing with very big and major giants. I'll just give an example. I think it was yesterday where there was a media report that indicated that of the 200 billion funding support for small, medium enterprises in South Africa, 75% of them went to previously advantaged companies. And previously disadvantaged companies are only getting about 15%, of that amount, if my figures are correct. And of the 200 billion, only 15 billion has been disbursed. And this is the second cycle of the same fund, because the first one, people complained that the requirements are too stringent. And even now, when the requirement relaxed, the majority of SMMEs that are supposed to be the backbone of the economy, are supposed to create jobs and actually alleviate unemployment, are basically struggling to actually access something as basic as funding. Forget actually even trying to get opportunities across the continent or even within the regions, the Southern Africa region, East Africa region, West Africa region. What role can trade unions play in ensuring that SMMEs, as the backbone of the economy and as the biggest employer in any economy, are also included in the opportunities that are meant to transform these economies? Thank you.
Sile, thank you very much. So Zingiswa, back over to you. You've got questions there, a range of questions from India, Nigeria, and South Africa on corruption and systematic corruption predating COVID. What would you do to encourage youth participation, particularly using technology, using your office to encourage regional trade, and the role of the trade unions in advocating for SMSEs in Africa, particularly on the issues of access to finance? So Zingiswa, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Chris. I hope you will help me with other questions, because where I'm located, it's close to the airport, so planes are flying and I'm unable to hear correctly, but I'll try my best, and hopefully you will then come back to me if I'm not responding with some of the questions. COSATU is part of the Southern African Trade Union Coordinating Council, SATU, in the region. And also we are an affiliate of ITUC in Africa, International Trade Union Congress. So when we speak about workers in South Africa, but also in the region, in the continent, we are able to share experiences, and we are able to make those interventions in terms of the region and the continent using those structures. So the influence of workers, it is not just about COSATU having that influence on its own, but it's about COSATU being a member of the two organizations that were affiliated to in the region and in the continent, in us driving the needed interventions in relation to, for example, your African Union, where we would have an opportunity to meet also with other social civil society organizations on the side to make that influence that is needed. So we have made those interventions, not just at the level of the country, as I've said, but also I must say that we have called and we have taken resolutions in these two areas that I've mentioned, at the level of the region and in the level of the continent, where we have established youth structures within the trade union movement to ensure that young people are able to have a voice, not older generation speaking on their behalf, but we have also created space for them to sit at the table and be able to raise issues that are confronting them and how the future should be looking like using their own lenses. So these are the areas where COSATU has had a number of influences and interventions. And the role of small, medium enterprises, you know, in South Africa alone, the president, I remember in his last two State of the Nation addresses, has always made an emphasis on the importance of state-owned enterprises, as the last speaker was raising, Sistuli, that they are the creators of jobs in our country. But what we have seen when we were dealing with the relief funds that was responding to the crisis of COVID-19 is that even what was reported by the Minister of Small Medium Enterprises was that 75% of what were bank guarantees, or the 200 billion that was given, it went to white companies. Some were not even in compliance with the BEE. And these are the challenges that we're faced with, because those small medium enterprises continue to suffer. And we think that it is important for us as civil society organizations, because COSATU is part of that, to really speak to each other. And this is what we have done in the recent month. In the past month, we had a SADC civil society forum where all civil society organizations were represented, trying to chart a way exactly to address the importance of the economy of our region and the continent responding to the small medium enterprises. Because you are not going to build any economy relying on foreign direct investment. These companies, when they come, they only focus on the fourth industrial revolution and implementing it at the expense of workers and at the expense of the economy. And what we understand is that if we are going to rely on the big companies that are automated now, we are going to lose workers in terms of them losing their jobs, and when they lose jobs, they lose the buying power. So I agree with Sispiri that it is important for us to allow ourselves to put small, medium enterprises to be the ones that are given a recognition. And when we do that, it means we rely upon ourselves as a country. That is why COSATU is a signatory at the level of NETLEC of buying local procurement, proudly South African. Let us consume what we produce. Let us produce what we consume. And we think that this is the only way that we are going to be able to deal with issues of high levels of unemployment in terms of job creation. It is for us to be able to do that. And you know what? As a continent of Africa, we have everything that the outside world needs. We have everything. We have all the resources. The fight that we see between the US and China, it is not about them, but it is about who's going to conquer the African continent. Until leaders in the African continent begin to appreciate that and put the African people first and say that whoever that comes through will only be able to invest in the African continent with our conditions being cited by ourselves. The issue of corruption, Chris, it has always been there before COVID-19 came. And Africa, you know, it is like, we know it's a worldwide phenomenon, corruption. Sometimes it is termed differently. When it is in the public sector, we call it corruption. When it is in the private sector, we call it colluding. Now we call it price fixing. We give it different names. The bottom line is that it's corruption and it takes away from the poor. Until we have leaders in government, in the private sector, who are going to see themselves as champions of fighting corruption. Because where there is a corrupter, there is a corruptee. And so where there is a corruptee, there is a corrupt. So it's public and private sector enabling that. And as a federation, we have called on our members to say, do not allow yourself to be used in that process. When you see something that is unbecoming, report it. Because if you allow yourself to press the enter button when you know that the processes are not correct and this thing, it is corruption as you see it, you are an enabler yourself. So for us to open the economy and unlock the potential that we have, corruption is what is stealing from the poor. South Africa, we have seen the food, simple thing like food parcels. And people that steal these food parcels are people that have a salary every month that is guaranteed, coming from the very same taxpayers. We have seen how people have marked up the prices of PPEs, and which has made it impossible for the poorest of the poor to be able to fight COVID-19, because pharmaceutical companies have decided to make the prices of medicine not to be affordable. The prices of food in the retail sectors, they have marked them up, which takes away from the poor. And only those that are able to beat COVID-19 are those that have, which are taking from the have-nots. So this cancer of corruption is a cancer that we must appreciate that once we are able to deal with it, then the rest of everything else will be able to fall into place. Perhaps that is why COSATU has always said that socialism is the future building now, because capitalism is the one that makes us to have an unequal society, you know, because the one that is rich continues to be rich and the one that is at the bottom continues to be at the bottom. So the scale is never equal. So we are saying that we need to ensure that we work hand in hand, and that's why we are saying when we raise the issues that we do not say it is the government responsibility or the private sector responsibility. We think all of us as social partners, we have that responsibility, and we call on trade unions across the African continent, across the oceans, to be able to speak to one another, because business communicates with one another. When business takes a decision to disinvest and go and invest elsewhere, it is because they speak to each other. And one thing that is common is to maximize profit at the expense of workers. Workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains. So it is important for us as workers to be vigilant and speak to one another so that an employer does not move from one country to another, continuously exploiting workers and maximizing their profits. Otherwise, we will remain with our hands and our feet chained.
Zingiswa, thank you very much. We're going to take 3 more questions now. I'll take 3 from those who have their hands raised that I can see on my screen here. And then for the next round of questions, I'll take some from the Q&A box as well that are dealing with issues that haven't yet been raised. So top of my list here is Simon Fremantle. Simon, if you're able to unmute yourself and ask your question, please, and introduce yourself and tell us who you are.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Zingiswa, for your comments. My name is Simon Fremantle. I work for Standard Bank as a political economist. I wonder if I can just ask your view on a very contentious issue, which is, of course, the public sector wage agreement that government has not delivered in COSATU's view this year, the 0%, or the wage freeze effectively. I know, of course, that COSATU unions are in an arbitration phase with government at the moment around that. But if we step back and we look at the COVID-19 crisis, it has, of course, further undermined to quite an extreme level government's fiscal resources. And we're facing the inability to fund some of the recovery initiatives that have been put forward. And in that context, it's difficult to come up with the additional, this is the argument from government at least, that 37 billion rand that would be required this year, and if you borrow it, it would effectively imply a 70 billion rand cost to honor the previous wage agreement. So just your views on that would be very interesting. And of course, looking ahead, you know, there needs to be a new wage agreement for the next 2 or 3 years, and that also has a very obvious fiscal implication. So I guess the underlying question is, do you think that the fiscal consolidation path set by the finance minister is plausible? Because that does relate to COSATU's position on not wage cuts, but on lowering and reducing the pace of wage growth for the public sector in particular. I'd love your thoughts on that generally, and specifically on this year's wage, the arbitration process for this year's wage increase. Thank you.
Simon, thank you very much. The next on my list is Monyani Lekuche. Monyani, are you there? Please unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Hey, good afternoon. Well, good afternoon here in the US. Monyane. I work here for a hedge fund in the US, and but I'm originally from there in Southern Africa. My question is in relation to data. So with COVID, I think South Africa, in respect to the African continent, appears to have developed a reliable data gathering apparatus. This data has been pivotal in the distribution of resources and identifying areas of concern. So my question is, are there initiatives in your institutions to gather and use data to identify opportunities such as the call center you mentioned earlier, or problem areas such as loss of productivity due to power cuts? So I was just thinking that there's lots of solutions available with data, and I was wondering if there are initiatives done by your institution to gather and use the data. Thank you.
Monyani, thank you very much. And the final question for this round, and then we'll come back for some more, from Christopher Adoli. Christopher, please, are you able to unmute yourself and introduce yourself?
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chris. I'm Adele Christopher from Asabeshan Yaradua, and I'm the youth coordinator over here. The pandemic has also caused unemployment among youth in most African countries, no doubt about that. Now, what's the way forward for them? Or what programs should they involve in to enable them to stand on their feet? Like, since this is an African program, what plans are in there for the youth to enable them to stand up to their feet and meet the coronavirus? Thank you.
Christopher, thank you very much. Okay, Zingiswa, 3 questions for you there. One on the public sector wage agreement and honouring the past agreement, and your thoughts on the fiscal consolidation set out by the finance minister. A question on data gathering, and a further question on youth. So, Zingiswa, please.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to the comrades that have asked the questions. Simon, on wage freeze in the public sector and trying to find that balance. You see, it would have been easy for workers to be convinced that we have fiscal challenges. Of course, not that we don't know that our fiscal is taking a strain. But you can't sign a legal document. And firstly, the past 3 years, in 2018, you force workers as they negotiate, when they have moved, you manage them to move away from a year-to-year agreement to a 3-year agreement so that you don't come every year to negotiate. And workers, out of reluctance, they agree. So they signed a 3-year wage agreement. Now you implement the first year, the second year. On the 3rd year, you say to workers, using COVID as an excuse, that you are unable to honor the year wage agreement, and therefore you are calling on the courts of this country to nullify that agreement. And a clause in that agreement says, in order for any of the two parties to change the agreement and pull back, you have to have consensus. Now, government moves ahead on its own and nullifies an agreement and applies to court. Now, how do you then deem a signed agreement that you have already paid for the past 2 years invalid? You have already implemented this agreement, and you make it an excuse of workers that, by the way, the minister that signed this agreement had no mandate initially when she agreed to it. But these are processes of negotiation. No minister was forced. A minister was representing a government. Where the minister takes a mandate, she knows. Now she comes to the agreement, to the negotiations, and says, I agree with these conditions. Of course, not with everything. An agreement is signed. So, but also what makes it even worse, Simon, is that whilst you are telling workers that we have no money to pay you, so you redirect the money that you have to deal with COVID-19. And then you put a salt into the wound of these workers, who are frontline workers, by the way, who are battling with the virus, who are unable to get proper protective clothing, who die without them being resuscitated. And these are doctors and nurses who have lived their professional life resuscitating patients. And government is saying to them, what we had agreed to pay you, we are unfortunately not going to do that because we're dealing with COVID. And we appreciate you as frontline workers. But appreciating you, it means we're unable to pay you for the travel, not even a danger allowance. So they die, these public sector workers, because they have contracted this virus at the workplace. Because they are deemed as frontline workers and they are important heroes and heroines of our country. And then whilst they are busy doing that, you have billions of rands getting lost in this country through corruption on those protective clothing that they are supposed to be getting. The balance, just when you deal with those issues, it is immoral for the very same government to tell these workers that your contract agreement is invalid. We are not prepared to give you a dime this year. But you know what? Within our own government institutions, we will allow everyone to do as they please with the very same money that we claim we do not have. And to us, it is just an insult. If there is no money and government agrees, let us see it. At least let us be able to say, indeed, we see the shift because the poorest of the poor in this country has been taken care of. But our people are hungry. Our people are languishing in poverty. So austerity measures are not helping us by our government. A lot of money goes to waste. And who has paid a single cent? Let us not only deal with COVID-19 corruption, let us deal with corruption that came way before COVID-19. Who has been arrested? We don't know. They are still investigating. Who has been made to pay off what they have stolen from the public? No one. But workers are always the victims. When jobs are lost, when the austerity measures must be implemented, it means cut the head count of workers, but ministers, public sector bosses, they continue to receive what is due to them. It is very difficult to talk about a balance when indeed the scales are not equal. So it is a very difficult matter, but we think that for us to be dealing with eruptions of corruption in each and every province in our country, during this time, it is an insult to frontline workers who have given it all only to receive nothing. Now, the youth of our people, of our country, even in the, we think the young people must stand up. You know, as South Africa, we always celebrate Youth Month in June. June 16, Youth of the Month. We think Month of Young People. We think the young people in South Africa, in the region, in the continent, in the entire world, must begin to demand their voices to be heard, not only to be heard, but they must be seen, and begin to draft an agenda that must influence those that are in authority. You see, we tend, Chris, to always have, when we discuss issues that are affecting young people, it becomes old people that drive this discussion. And young people, either they are writing notes, but they are not at the table discussing these issues. You know, their ideas probably are the ones that are doing research, but their voices are not heard. They're not given the platform. It's the older generation. We ask ourselves, the 2063 plan of the African Union, those old men and women that decided that we are going to have a 2063 plan, by 2063, none of them will be alive. So how do you make them to account when they take decisions on behalf of everyone else that is even younger than them? By the time they must account, they will not be there. We think we need a drastic shift in allowing space for the young people. And you know what? The future is not ours. The future is the future of the young people, and the innovation is coming with them. They are in universities, they are graduating, but when they graduate, they have no job. We're putting them on the sideways because old people want to retire and die with government pensions, and not allow young people to be the ones now that are shaping the future. We cannot, yes, the past is important because it helps us to know where we're coming from. But let older generation move on the sideways. They can still tap in when we need some guidance. But we think that if we want to deal with the future, we must create the space for young people and women to take their rightful place and lead, because they know, we believe they will take care of the future because the future is theirs. I'm not sure if I've left something. I was not sure if I got the question correctly from Monyani.
It was a question on data gathering and the use of data to inform policy.
The data, you know, COSATU has called for, even in our country, that we are saying as we move towards the future, and the future now is the digital economy and the digital future, data is very, very important to enable us to get there. We, in the document that I was sharing with all of you, is that part of what is going to grow this economy is for us to be able to appreciate and embrace fourth industrial revolution and artificial intelligence. But we are unable to do that when energy crisis is the order of the day, when we are unable to have or to afford data in our countries. So, as I've said, that for you know, data can be affordable, but if you have no energy, you are still in crisis. We had a load shedding. One had to move because the internet connection that I have relies on the energy to be available. With no electricity, with no security supply of energy, you are unable to do anything. So that is why we are saying lower the cost of data, enable the people of this country and the entire world to have access to the tools that are going to enable us to be competitive, and also to be able to run and build our economy effectively and efficiently. and so that we can also impact the necessary skills that are in line with the economy that we are saying it is what we are looking forward to. The future, not only the current that we're dealing with. So we are calling as a federation for the lower of affordability in terms of data. We are calling for accessibility to energy in this country. We are calling for young people to be impacted with necessary skills for the reskilling, upskilling, and ensure that you are not only going to deal with only one issue that you are an expert on. So we're calling for people to be multi-skilled. Workers now, when we go to retail sectors, you will find that a teller now is replaced by a machine. That talks to data. You know, now we must be able to use our phones to be able to make transactions. We are not going to be able to do that if data is not affordable. Now, that is why we are calling for an affordability of data and the lower costing of data in our country, and I think in the African continent as a whole, because South Africa is not an island. We must be able to trade with the entire world and be able to make those transactions in the interest of our people.
Zingiswa, thank you very much for those. We're approaching the end, but we did start a couple of minutes late, and we did say that we'd take some of the questions that the audience have been putting into the Q&A box. So I'll read out a few of those, and then perhaps you would take a few of them as part of your final remarks here. So we had a question from Andrew Matheny, who was reiterating the point that Simon Fremantle was making with regards to the wage bill. So that question's been answered, but it was a popular one being asked. We have a question from Dennis Horch, who has asked, Dear Zingiswa, you are calling for a social compact among government, business and labour as social partners to build the economy back better. Business for South Africa, B4SA, is basically calling for the same. Are COSATU and B4SA already in a dialogue process to tackle the challenge together? A question from Takalani Ratiyaya, who's asking, last weekend the ANC-NEC resolved to host an economic recovery and reconstruction Lekotla. You just mentioned now that the social partners at NEDLAC are finalizing the National Economy Recovery and Reconstruction Program to be announced by President Ramaphosa in the next few days. Is this a sign that economic policy making in SA is highly contested? And how can SA deal with this contestation? How are all these plans going to be reconciled and implemented to get the country going again to address the gigantic challenge the country is facing? And finally, a question from Nicholas Cook, who has introduced himself as from the Congressional Research Service in the United States, so a researcher for the US Congress Congressional Research Service. And he's asking, a key criticism of the labor economy in South Africa is that the labor system is inflexible, notably under sector-specific labor agreements and privileges incumbent workers. It is notable that while sector-specific minimum wages have existed for years, a general national minimum wage was enacted only 2 years or so ago, despite multiple years of economic growth. Can you please speak to labor system inflexibility as a challenge in reversing the very high unemployment and low economic growth rates? We'll take those. So there are questions on dialogue with Business for SA, the economic recovery Lekotla, and where is their contestation, and perhaps where is their agreement on long-term economic issues. And finally, a question there from Nick Cook on the flexibility of the labour market. So Zingiswa, if you'd like to take those three or some of those three, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Let me start with Nicholas's question on the inflexibility of the labor system. You know, this question is always posed when employers are claiming that they are unable to dismiss workers. So they say our labor policies are inflexible, and you have called for the national minimum wage, and which is going to result to companies closing down. And you know, we always find this, that it is a scarecrow that always gets to be thrown out, because the Labor Relations Act in this country allows an employer to dismiss a worker. It's very simple. Nothing prohibits an employer, when a worker has transgressed, for an employer to dismiss a worker. So there is nothing in the labor policy or in the labor relations in this country that is skewed and in favor of workers. Actually, as you correctly put it, Nicholas, that we have agreed on the national minimum wage in the past 2 years, and many employers have not implemented it. There are no consequences for that. We have agreed in this country that every year we are going to have an increase in that national minimum wage. It has not been implemented. So what is it that is inflexible that business wants to see? Are we going to be walkovers as workers, such that you can willy-nilly fire as you wish? That you can wake up tomorrow, as our government has done, decide that what you have agreed with workers, because now you feel it is no longer suitable for you, you can throw that to the rubbish bin. We don't think it is critical. You know, the existence of trade union is to defend exactly those rights that were hard-won by workers through many sacrifices, and that they have been agreed to. Let me make another example. Business in this country said they went to a job summit. They agreed to create jobs, you know, they gave commitments. We signed, we were all smiling. A month just after, not even a month, they announced retrenchments. They said, we're going to employ 10,000 workers in the next 10 years. And what we did not know, everyone was excited, is that they are going to give us a retrenchment notice of 10,000 workers with immediate effect. So they retrench you now, 10,000, to employ 1,000 each year for the next 10 years. They did not say it like that. They said, we are pledging and we are committing ourselves to building this economy, and this is what we're going to do. But when we leave, the following days, we hear that business is busy retrenching all over in all sectors. So which policies are inflexible that they are unable to allow business to come and invest in our country? We think just business in our country sometimes is very spiteful. When they can decide to go on an investment strike, they do that and say the reason why we're not investing it is because of the inflexible labor policies in our country. We don't believe so. We are dealing now, you know, another question that was asked by someone about the fiscus. Let me tell you, Chris, the illicit financial flows, money leaving this country by big business, is what should have been invested in this country, and business paying their dues, the taxes, so that we're able to have a revenue that we can work on, so that the fiscus is not strained. But no, business can redirect their money and avoid taxation in our country, and yet government response to business is to give them tax breaks. They have already taken those tax breaks. So there is nothing that is inflexible, because the Labor Relations Act does not favor workers. It talks to workers and employers. It manages that relationship. It tries to find that balance, because for every action there is a reaction, and it appreciates that. So I'm raising and I'm saying that thing of inflexible does not even exist. It does not arise. CCMA in this country, Conciliation and Mediation Commission, is dealing with cases where when a worker wins a case and there is a directive for an employer to implement, the employer does not implement. the employer has a right to challenge that decision to the labor court. Imagine a domestic worker that says, it has been agreed that I'm going to be paid a 2,500 rand a month in terms of a national minimum wage in my sector. My employer is only paying me 1,000 rand. Now there's a dispute. A worker wins that dispute at the level of the CCMA because the employer did not apply for exemption as it is expected in terms of the National Minimum Wage Act. But then the CCMA gives an award to the worker. The employer contests a difference of 1,500 to take it to the labor court and not pay a worker. So it means a worker now must find a lawyer. You're going to pay a lawyer more. So what does the worker do? They end up unable to challenge those issues because they don't have lawyers. It's a domestic worker, afraid of not getting any more employment, and relies on that 1,000 rand even when an award was in her favor. So there is no inflexibility of labor policies in this country. It's just that when business wants to find an excuse of not investing, they then look for many excuses, and yet they do not answer to all other atrocities that they are busy with, you know, in terms of illicit financial flows and investment strikes. On the issue of, there's a question about on Tagalan. NETLEC is where social partners are meeting to discuss the policies, the labor policies in this country. Government is represented there. Labor, organized labor, not just COSATU, and business sector, different kinds of sectors in business. Now, whatever that gets to be discussed at NETLEC, there is no sector of this economy that is taken outside, including civil society, meaning your community sector. They are also part of the processes at NETLEC. So it will mean, or even those that have corporates, small, medium enterprises, they are represented, they have representatives. So any policy that leaves NETLEC and we have agreed to, it is a consensus that has been reached by social partners in our country. So when the president makes any announcement, it is an announcement that cannot be contested beyond what we have already had contestations and agreed upon. So you don't necessarily have to have that balance or that reconciliation, because we think that we have managed to trash issues. It is not an easy process. We always have differences, but when we arrive at a settlement on what are give and takes, we think that when the president makes any announcement, it will be an announcement that has considered all different parts of players in our country and in our economy. So they would also be dealing with those challenges that the country is facing, and we're working tirelessly. Every day, people are meeting. There is an economic recovery team that is dealing with all the challenges that are facing and how we're going to grow this economy and go back in growing it. Everyone is part of it. All sectors of our economy, community sector, labor, business, and government. So anything that comes and everything that the president announces, it will be a reflection of everyone and all the compromises that would have been made. Dennis, on the business for South Africa, at the level of NETLEC, as I've said, that we have been engaging with business sector. But if business for South Africa is not represented at the level of NETLEC, and you believe that we share the same views, COSATU is open to be engaged and to engage everyone that is going to help us to take this country forward, particularly when we have common views on policy positions. So if we have not had a one-on-one, which we have not, on one-on-one we have not, but I don't know whether Business for South Africa is part of those businesses, organizations that are represented through BUSA and BLSA, because we have Business Unit South Africa, we have Business Leadership of South Africa at Network, we have Black Management Forum, that is also at Network. So I'm not sure whether you fall under any of those or you are on your own, and whether you have a space at the level of Network. But if you don't, COSATU is prepared and willing to listen to anyone and share ideas. We are prepared to learn from others. We are prepared to be influenced, and let's see what we can do together, as long as ours is of a common purpose of taking this country forward. Thanks, Chris.
Zingiswa, thank you very much for a very rich discussion this afternoon and for taking everybody's questions. I'd just like to thank everybody watching for taking part, for participating, and for engaging in this conversation. Our next webinar on Southern Africa will take place on Tuesday the 8th. So that's next Tuesday from 10 until 11:30 British summertime. And that will be on Zimbabwe's economy during the coronavirus pandemic and beyond. So looking at Zimbabwe's economy next Tuesday morning, which just leaves me to invite all of you watching to thank our speaker this afternoon by raising your hand to show your appreciation, seeing as we can't clap our hands. If you raise your hand to show appreciation for our speaker this afternoon, the president of COSATU, Zingiswa Losi. Zingiswa, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thanks for everyone that participated. We have noted some have given us some ideas on how we can deal with issues, and we welcome all of the ideas how to be better, not only South Africa, but I think the entire economy in the region, in the continent, and in the world. What we want is a better living for our people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.